what it comes down to really is safety critical systems. When you have a mixture of AI and safety critical systems, the problem is so much harder than if you're talking about a customer support system. There's a whole graveyard of autonomy companies that have basically made mistakes that hurt someone or killed someone, and that effectively destroyed an enormous opportunity for those companies. And so you have to take safety very seriously. And frankly, think about how many times does ChatGPT give you an answer that's not correct, right? You can't have that in a safety critical application.
Hi, my name is Qasar. This is Peter. We're the co-founders of Applied Intuition. We're a $15 billion company based in Mountain View, California, which takes AI and puts it into lots of different machines, cars, trucks, tanks, you name it, and broadly under the category of vehicle intelligence. And we're looking forward to talking about both the bull case and the bear case of AI and where it's at today.
Maybe just by way of getting started, just for folks who may not be familiar with Applied Intuition, tell us a little bit about the company and why they should be interested in this conversation today.
So Applied Intuition is a AI and software company, and we fall into this in some ways it's a very boring company, right? It's just a AI company based in Mountain View, California, but in a way that it's very unique or different from every other AI company you've heard of is we're typically AIs focused on screens. We're talking about ChatGPT. It's typically that is the interaction through a phone or a laptop. We very much work in the worlds of vehicles. So cars, trucks, tanks, jets, stuff like that, construction, mining equipment. So we take that AI and like literally in this modern architectures that we talk about AI and LLMs, we take that kind of technology and we put it into these physical vehicles. So some of those experiences would be self-driving, some of those would be intelligent cabins. So if you think about a warfighter today, they're on the battlefield, the traditional tank human interaction is actually quite limited. If you're ever wondering what it's like to be in a tank, you can go on YouTube and there's some great, interesting videos, but the punchline is scary because it's not, there's
one word.
You're like, oh my God, this is like, it's a complex machine that's fairly mechanical. And so we built technology to make all of that stuff more smart. I don't know, Peter, maybe
I can't tell you how many times a guest on the show says, the traditional human tank interaction, ... It's just, it's like every day we're hearing about
at this point.
Yeah, like, I was like, are we having this conversation again?
Yeah, I saw Henrik's eyes glazing over. It's okay. It's okay.
This is so far beyond the prompt. We actually need a new title for the podcast. That's amazing.
I mean, it's similar though in terms of the prompt concept is good because the machine doesn't run alone. It's the human machine teaming. And I think a lot of the AI, let's say fear that emerges, like somehow these things are going to, just like a ChatGPT doesn't just do anything. You have to ask it to do anything. And this is similar things with these machines. I don't know, Peter, if you have a different view.
And the only thing I would add is we use the term vehicle intelligence, right? So it's we are making all types of vehicles intelligent and then trying to create real value, whether that's for consumers and let's say ADAS, which is self-driving cars, or value to logistics and trucking and autonomous trucking, and then obviously value in the form of deterrence with lethal systems as well in defense.
Okay, but you said, again, lethal. I can't tell you how many times we hear that word on the show, which is, I think, never. But before we go there, you just said something. Okay, you said it doesn't run alone. And it reminds me, I heard Sam talking with Tucker Carlson the other day. And Tucker was kind of asking, hey, don't these things seem sentient? Aren't they, and Sam said, hey, I get why you might feel that way, but it doesn't do anything on its own. And I'm I'm a professional nerd. I'm a creativity expert. And so I'm always thinking about how do we optimize for this, human, collaboration. And that Sam's comment there really sparked something for me, which is taking the initiative still matters. Being
exactly.
The prompt, so to speak, still really matters. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on whether that will continue to be the case. I think right now, you made this statement. I wrote it down. It doesn't just do, you have to ask. Do you envision a world where it does just do? Because I agree right now, that's true. The human initiative is critical. Will that continue to be the case? And for how long will it be?
Yeah, I think anything in software and AI that's in the current amount of change that goes beyond 2 years can roughly be called speculation. So we don't know what the true correct answer is. That's the engineer in me and try to be precise. But I would say the MBA in me, who wants to create an entertaining podcast, would say, I don't think you're going to have to change the podcast name anytime soon. The point really being is the context and the desired outcome is so important to the actual response of the system that I think removing that is a pretty Herculean task. Let's use another example. In the past, if you look at the late 90s and early 2000s of what was expected out of software and what actually happens out of software, which is basically like we still have problems with Wi-Fi. We still have problems with video conferencing. I mean, it happens every single day. Not sometimes. It happens every day. I still have bugs in maps when I'm coming to work. So there's a fantasy, and then there's the reality. And the reality is these are still quite, I would say, simple systems. And even at the rate of change that we're seeing, let me give you the bear case on AI rather than everyone so commonly gives the bull case of it's going to.
I love it. I love it.
To change everything. The bear case is, ChatGPT, roughly, and really no one really at that level in terms of consumer adoption, basically becomes the new Google. It's an information retrieval system that's better. And it also integrates a bunch of different, interesting things like just like Google did shopping and things like that. But it's an information retrieval system fundamentally. And then all the other systems we're talking about, cars, and we're talking about, your assistant and all this stuff, they're all just the better versions of what they are right now. They don't become like these magical experiences. You get autonomy, but autonomy becomes general. Now, even that, honestly, if we did that in the next 10 years, would be a pretty exceptional outcome. So in your question, there's this loaded assumption, which is the rate of change will continue to be extremely high, and the value, so not only change, but the value to the end user will continue to exponentially increase. And I think the reason I use the old software examples of late 90s and 2000s is, we still have basic problems. And I think you can still have basic problems that don't get solved on AI for a long, long, long time.
But on the autonomous driving, I mean, like, I think I have an 11-year-old. And so like everybody else, we've been talking about, will my kid ever get the driving license or not, right? And I think that conversation, I remember with some of my friends like 6 years ago, and they were like, no, my kid at that time will never. And then obviously, then they're driving us around with their driving license. Why is it that specific problem seemed to be taking so long?
It's really hard. The people.
Next question.
People are
Okay.
Yeah, it's not like the engineers are like twiddling their thumbs.
See, that was my assumption that they were just kind of like, they had all these soda machines like in their well-funded kitchens. And so that's why they were not.
Yeah. What it comes down to really is safety critical systems. When you have a mixture of AI and safety critical systems, the problem is so much harder than if you're talking about a customer support system.
That's any orders of magnitude.
You're not vibe coding something that goes 200 miles an hour. Is that the thing?
But the reality is, right? Like there's a whole graveyard of autonomy companies that have basically made mistakes that hurt someone or killed someone, and that effectively destroyed an enormous opportunity for those companies.
Yeah.
And so you have to take safety very seriously. And frankly, think about how many times does ChatGPT give you an answer that's not correct, right? You can't have that in a safety critical application.
I don't want to make the bull case here, but just to rebut or to respond, Qasar, to your bear case. You mentioned, in the bear case, chat just becomes Google's information retrieval. But the truth is, it's already beyond that now. I think anybody who treats chat like it's Google it's malpractice, right? And I often joke with people, look at your chat history. Is it a chat history or is it a search history? And if it's a search history, you haven't even scratched the surface. Chat is defined by conversational turns, right? This wouldn't be a chat if one of us were monologuing the whole time. So is that bear case, even a possibility? Because I think even now, chat is maybe to the poorest performing users, it's information retrieval. But to anybody who's collaborating with an in your hand coach and expert and creative partner and advisor, and, imagine the persona. It's hard to really make a good case that this is simply informational retrieval, even just right now, right?
Yeah, but you're talking about, the power extreme user. If you look at my mom's use of Google, not ChatGPT, I should say, it's going to be very different than your use of Google. It's going to be much, much simpler, and maybe, the things that you take for granted in Google, she doesn't even know because it's just not the way she interacts with it. So yeah, it's like any tool. There will be power users who get the most out of it. But all of this is under the previous assumption. And by the way, I'm doing this more for, as much for theatrics and entertainment as for real.
Obviously, ChatGPT, I think you're right. Like even now makes like many mistakes, and we kind of apologize because, it can make a cat rap. So therefore it's cool, right? If we look at some of the stuff that you're working on, is there a way where you can kind of ladder yourself into this awesome new world, or is it binary? Like, because to your point, like a car can't drive like almost safe, right? It has to drive safe. But is there then like elements of autonomous driving or autonomous vehicle that you guys see will be the stuff that will come in soon? That will be kind of the equivalent of the aha moment of DALL-E or whatever kind of steps we've had?
I mean, that's already happening. Yeah, absolutely. And the version of that is assisted driving. Right. So if anyone's used Tesla FSD, or if you used anything like that, that is not a full self-driving system, even though it's called FSD.
Illegal debate.
Currently, literally a legal debate with billions on the line. So there are those steps, and we're very much in those steps. So that's the version of that earlier question of, can the AI basically work without a prompt? In our universe is, you basically sit in the vehicle and it really does everything. It knows your calendar, it knows where you're going, and it basically backs out of your driveway, takes you to destination. And then while you're in the meeting or in the coffee shop, it charges itself and comes back. That will happen. The question, it's like before this company, I was at a place called Y Combinator, and Y Combinator is most famously known in this universe as, also where OpenAI was started. I mean, Sam was the president, I was the COO, and it was a part of YC research that project really kind of kicked off. So, been looking at this area for a long, long time. The punchline is, I think all of these things will take a long time to actually make in the way that we think, we kind of expect. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a wasteful endeavor, and we should be waiting until like the perfect thing comes. And I think our strategy at Applied has always been actually that incremental way, the steps all the way there, until we get to this, like, let's say a future which has.
And it's important to note as well, right? So all of the core innovations and research that are powering things like ChatGPT and Stable Diffusion and like Sora and all of these things, we at Applied, we benefit and we contribute also to all of that same research. So there's the same core technical elements for those systems we are using all throughout our products at this point. Because the manifestation of those is different, right? When you're controlling let's say a hauler for mining, yes, you can have transformers and a lot of advanced technology inside of that, but it's not the same as ChatGPT.
But do you think that you might see kind of leaps that is bigger or at least more noticeable for people who don't understand the industry in a miner or in a boat or in a drone or something else because of all the issues that tied into cars specifically?
I mean, if you think about when you started as a consumer, starting using ChatGPT, you didn't need a lot of someone to sit next to you and say, like, look how great this is. I actually remember the first time I used Google search, and similarly, based before, when you had Ask Jeeves and some of the other products, it was just notably different.
I still use Alta Vista.
All right, good one. Yeah,
He's the one.
It's like,
he's the one.
Well, what I was thinking when you said your kid is going to drive, would have a driver's license in the future, to be really cool. Not only will you have a driver's license, but you also drive manual. Like that means with your hands rather than
Totally.
like actually with a stick shift. But no one's going to drive with a stick. We're
real skills.
Yeah. So I think, we benefit from all of these things as consumers, and it's very obvious. When you go to a mine or you go to a commercial trucking company that's building these things, we don't have to spend a lot of time explaining. I think we showcase our work and that connection happens. I mean, like the internet impacting, let's say Salesforce and that universe of the cloud enterprise company of the 2000s, right? From 2000 to 2000, let's say 15, which that's where enterprise software really becomes, enterprise software the way we know it today. The same thing is happening in enterprises with AI. On the consumer side, you experience this really great product, and then you look at your work applications and they're not very good. Most of us think about work applications as being like Slack or something, or Workday or something, or Rippling. But for people who build machines, work applications are these giant, products, and they think, well, these actually should be a lot more intelligent. And I don't know if there's many companies actually like us on the planet, certainly not at the scale that we're at. We're working across basically all geographies globally, working across basically all form factors of vehicles. So then that gives confidence, and the company is like a viable business in the sense of it's a profitable cash generating business, which is also very uncommon in the AI universe. So when our partners, I think, interact with us, all of that stuff really impacts me. Like, wow, this tech is interesting. Oh, I can see how you work in all these different geographies and different, types of vehicles. Oh, and you're like in it for the long haul. Because unlike a consumer experience, if Komatsu, we just announced this, long-term relationship with Komatsu.
I was going to ask you about them. They're a long-term partner of mine as well. Yeah, I was totally
yeah. And like they want to make sure you're going to be there. I mean, they're not just going to take a kind of swing at a 10-person company. And we know that because we used to be a 10-person company and we had to kind of really, fight our way up to where we're at today.
Tell us about, Komatsu, for folks who don't know, it's a Japanese company that makes, mining equipment, bulldozers and, big, heavy industrial equipment. Help folks who maybe can't really imagine what's the application of AI in an industrial space like that. I don't know whether it's Komatsu, if that's a public example, if you want to share that, or just help kind of blow people's minds or open people's imaginations to what are the applications there. I'm working with ChatGPT on my mobile device. How is mining company incorporating AI into their operations and their vehicles?
In the general realm of mining construction, there's this phrase that's used. So dull, dirty, and dangerous. The jobs are generally dull, dirty, and dangerous. If you are
much like podcasting, they understand. Come on, let's get more sophisticated.
We are putting our lives on the line here.
Yeah. And he had 2 paper cuts last week.
You've never been to a mine and seen this stuff up close. It's honestly, it's hard to like get the feeling of what it's really like. But this equipment is just enormous. I mean, like I'm almost 6 feet tall. And my head is like halfway up the tire on one of these machines. Like these are just enormous. And these machines can be operating like hours away from the nearest airport, like many hours away from the nearest airport. And so you have a very limited number of people that are willing to do that kind of job. It's like, well, it's sort of miserable and lonely and it's dirty and it's dangerous, all of these things. And so labor is a constant issue. And related to that is, there are many things that just don't happen because you don't necessarily have people that are willing to do the kinds of work. And then some of the conditions are like what you're trying to do is fundamentally going to be so dangerous. And there's many examples of this in construction and mining where you're sort of nervous to put people actually sort of in that kind of risky environment. And all of these things are extremely high value applications for bringing AI into those industries.
Yeah, the actual like examples of, how you use AI here is a human walks up to a dirt mover, one of these large haulers that Komatsu builds, and it knows who it is. And as the human sits in the vehicle, the hauler understands the state of the human. Are they tired? I mean, these mines, and especially in large sites, will run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for a decade. I mean, this is the backbone of everything that the phrase in mining is, if it's not grown, it's mined. Which basically everything that we're touching, seeing, and interacting with ultimately has its roots in something that was mined out of the earth. And mines, again, this is for people who are not in this space. The amount of tonnage of material and how big the biggest mines are beyond covered. They're like cities, thousands of people moving tonnages of dirt every hour, every minute, and so you become tired. So you're exhausted, and you are sometimes even much further than a couple of hours from an airport. And so it's kind of like, deep sea drilling. Right. It's a hazardous environment, and it's almost through intention. You're not going to be digging massive amounts of dirt where there are people who live there. See, it's one of the reasons why like the Saudis and the Middle East, the oil is so valuable, is because they drill it in the middle of a desert and there's
when
nobody
you
there.
then create like features for that, is it increasingly like then almost like agent by agent? There's one system that then sees if the person is tired. There's one person that sees if there is, like objects around that they could drive into. Or
or what
do
are
you see
all the things? Like Henrik's imagination is stronger than mine because I'm still trying to think about what's AI doing there.
Well, there's one if they're tired, right? Which is the one.
Got that one.
But
Yeah.
what are like a few other ones that could get into this dirt mover?
Maybe more specifically, what are the dangerous situations you could get into? In a environment like this, the dirt under you moves, the dirt around you moves, and there are people around you because these machines are so big that the machine can, accidentally run into people and run into other machines, and there's a visibility.
There's a lot of dust, so you can't see very well.
Yeah, we think about it this like very clean, environment, and then again, when you're doing it for 6 months in a row, that's when the things that weren't, protocols that maybe should have been followed, maybe are not followed. When you go to a mine or you go to places like this, safety is the beginning, middle, and end of everything that's happening. And so then we talk about, let's say, the non-safety stuff. Typically, the way, it's almost like an investment. You kind of figure out how much of some, let's say, copper is in this specific area, and you can figure out how much tonnage do I need to remove to get X amount of copper, and then it's just a formula. Then it's like, how many people do you need? How many trucks, haulers do you need? And then you just run that formula for like 20 years, 30 years. I mean, it's a long period of time.
Are they revisiting those assumptions annually?
Exactly.
Because it feels, wow, that's wild.
Exactly. So then suddenly you're like, oh, we can run these machines more. We don't have a labor shortage here, or we can run them because we're not having to do shifts in terms of people's exhaustion and things like that. The other thing that we haven't talked about is it's kind of like commercial trucking, which is in the autonomy space is often talked about as a pretty terrible job. If you're a long haul trucker, every health metric for you is worse than the average person. And today, the kind of untold story, and sometimes you hear these, like you see these headlines, like people don't want to work at McDonald's, like you'll see this kind of thing. The question is, where are those jobs actually going? Well, they're going to places like DoorDash or Uber. And the reason a DoorDash and Uber is better is you can turn it on and off when you want. You can be with your family. You can, if you have 16 hours you want to work and you can do it safely, you'll do that. I mean, I talk to drivers all the time in Uber, and I always ask them, what's your typical shift? And consistently they say, I'll try to do 10 to 12, but I'll break it up because I have kids to pick up and drop off. If they're working on a long haul truck or they're working a commercial mine, literally the last Uber driver I talked to was a long haul trucker. And I said, how do you juxtapose that job versus Uber? And he goes, they're both hard, they're physically demanding, but this is way better. I sleep in my own bed and I see my family every single day. And if I don't feel good, I can go easy. I don't have to tell anybody. It's my car. So those realities, underlying dynamics are impacting mining. And so the automation of mining becomes a much higher priority because suddenly nobody wants to, even in Australia as an example, which is, kind of the mining mecca of the world, the compensation for fairly, I would say, it's semi-skilled. It's not unskilled, but it's not, let's say, it doesn't require a PhD. It's a semi-skilled labor can be deep in the six figures, and they still can't recruit somebody to go because you have to go for 3 months at a time or 6 months at a time.
It's like joining the military or something, right? It's like being a part of the Roman army, right?
Yeah.
It can be much worse because, again, even in the military, unless you're in war, right, you're not actually subject to conditions like those mines. But I also wanted to talk for a minute about our actual technology to provide just a little more depth into what we actually do. So there's 3 areas, right? So engineering tools is really a foundation of a lot of what we've done. And this allows our engineering teams and our customers who purchase our tools to just build amazing systems using AI and autonomy technology for vehicles. We have
just on that, a lot of times for your listeners, they think about AI as this consumer application you interact with. The real question is, let's say there's 5 different companies working on AI. What are they actually doing? All of the stuff that you need to do, like, ingest data, figure out which of that data is going to be good for this model, and make sure you evaluate the quality of that data. Then you train that model, and then you actually deploy it. All those are engineering tools. And an AI company is as much in tooling company as it's anything else.
And in our case, those tools are tailored to vehicles and vehicle technology. And that's actually quite a bit different than like chatbot stuff because of all of these safety implications.
So there's a couple dozen tools we sell.
Exactly. And then we also use them ourselves. So that's engineering tools. We also make a vehicle operating system. And so this is like a bunch of embedded components that actually run on the compute in vehicles. And so earlier you were asking, well, what are like the different models that run vehicles? Well, fundamentally, we have a compute box, a high power AI compute box that goes onto these vehicles. And then our operating system runs on that. And then using our engineering tools, we can then deploy our applications onto the operating system. And those applications are various autonomy software, but also a number of other applications that run on these vehicles.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Well, one way to think about, there is a company that actually has did this model in the previous generation. It was Microsoft. Microsoft started from 1975 to 82 as a tooling company. Then they got into operating systems and ultimately got into applications. And us, rather than being on PCs, this is the Microsoft of, let's say, 70s, 80s, and early 90s. Us being PCs, we're on cars. And today we've talked a lot about mining just because the Komatsu thing. We've talked about defense, but our bread and butter and kind of where Peter and I come from, I went to the General Motors Institute, is automotive. And automotive is truly a consumer application. I mean, in the sense of every single person on the planet at some degree, no matter where they're at, is going to interact with cars almost on a daily basis. And so making those things
On the
more,
car stuff, for
intelligent.
example, just shifting gears a little bit, got that
Yeah.
on down, right?
Good fun.
You're the
I
first,
know.
Henrik. We've never
Pun
heard
sadly
that.
intended.
Never heard that before, right? I'm sure. It's like when people talk about my company, BarkBox, and try to like outdo me in dog puns. I'm like, I'll raise the woof. The UI, for example, is changing on the computer because of AI, right? Because now voice to text is something that actually kind of works. As we're kind of like seeing how your system is being built, is there still the dashboard? Is there still a wheel? Like, are we talking to it? As you kind of like exploring what is the most efficient UI to a car, what is that going to be in this kind of autonomous world?
You said two things that kind of mix together, but they're actually quite different, is the interaction with the machine and self-driving. And so if you are in a situation where it's like, what they call an L2++ system, so you're still expected to be in the loop of the drive, which means if the car disengages, you have to take over, i.e. you have to be in the driver's wheel. And that interface is going to be different than you don't have a steering wheel and you don't have pedals. And I do think we're seeing the early kind of rays of light of that future emerging, which is a future where there will be vehicles that won't have steering wheels and pedals. I don't think it's anytime in the next couple of years, but
I must be more like, practical in like, is that actually the best UI? Like, I would imagine you going to a Dumber, you might want to press a button once in a while just because it's going to be weird to say like, hey, Dumber, drive right.
Yeah.
So as I'm sure you do like a lot of kind of like evaluation or like what is the most effective kind of like interface. Where does that kind of take you?
It's a mix of voice and actual interaction that what you'd consider, traditional like human computer interaction, HCI. I think over time, over a longer period of time, I think it'll be almost all voice. The main reason is the example you just used, like turn left or turn right. The vehicle is going to know that already. So it's much more of a context kind of question. Like there's a faster way or there's a smoother way.
I'm fascinated by that. So you think even like in a fighter plane 30 years from now, they're going to be like, shoot the bad guy?
So that's very different. Yeah, that's very different. We just made a huge context change. Yeah. So in those types of situations, I think the human, because now you're going from using, the example you just used is like going from using ChatGPT to somebody who's writing software. Those are two different, so the interfaces are going to be different. I don't think they'll merge anytime soon.
And also, 30 years from now, frankly, it's quite unlikely that there will be any people in fighter jets, right?
Yeah, I think that'll be sooner than 30 years. I think we're looking at the last true fighter jet being developed right now. I think afterwards it will.
Yeah, it'll be all drones, autonomous
drone.
craft.
Yeah. My daughter wants to join the Air Force. You telling me that I might need to redirect her career-wise? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, there will be people who are in the Air Force. They just might not be pilots. So I think that as a military branch might even become more important than it's ever has. And I think Space Force, will become more important than it ever has, just because of the nature of conflict.
Yeah, and no matter what, I mean, the Air Force is going to be the primary procurer of drones and the drone warfare systems.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've been talking about how AI can kind of revolutionize your deployment of AI. Can we talk about your use of AI at Applied? What are the coolest, most interesting ways you've seen your team or yourselves or your team deploy AI to kind of get that 10x human kind of outcome?
Yeah, I mean, the most obvious and apparent, of course, is the use of AI coding tools, which are super interesting and valuable. I think it's actually probably the killer enterprise use case for LLMs. And I would say Anthropic is seeing, I think, good success from that. And them choosing to focus on that area with Claude was a good strategic move, because like every software engineer in the world can get a productivity boost from using these models. And it just takes care of a lot of the boilerplate. I think you do end up seeing there is a certain complexity ceiling that you hit with those tools, and that ceiling keeps rising, which is great. But when you're working on really hard problems, the LLMs become less useful still. But again, there's a lot of boilerplate, which the tools are it's still a productivity boost no matter what.
Yeah, and just to keep it entertaining, rather than saying what everybody says, the bear case on code complete tools is, you don't have to write a lot of software to know more software doesn't necessarily mean better software, especially in like systems we build, heavily optimized performance systems, because you don't have endless compute available when you're on the vehicle, when it's actually in inference in the real world. Now you got to pay for those chips. And
every line of code has a lifetime maintenance cost. And so more code, it does mean more maintenance.
It's
and,
technical debt, right?
Cool.
Technical debt's a real thing.
Do you have to make your own LLMs? I would imagine a lot of the systems that you're using, you have to write your own models, right? Because they have to run on hardware that.
We train a lot of models. The models that we train, though, they are more specific to the vehicle technology aspect. For generic things like coding, the off-the-shelf models are pretty great, and you can do a lot of prompt engineering to those models to sort of get what you want at the end of the day.
Is code gen the primary use, or are there other cool uses? I mean, I would I'll project for a moment, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong. Radical AI autonomy company in Mountain View, California, where I've lived for 12 plus years myself, by the way. But radical, futuristic company. You're telling me the coolest use cases of AI among your workforce is code gen?
Well, the reason I say that is because that's sort of like the infinity use case, right? If you can do code gen, you can do anything. And so this allows us to build.
That's a Sam Altman answer. That's a Sam Altman answer. If we just get it to write better, AI, then that solves everything. There's not like performance review lists. There's not like, you're just Peter right before Qasar joined. Peter was telling us how all of a sudden you're professionalizing your recruiting process, and the brand is out there in a way that it wasn't before. There aren't fascinating ways that those teams are getting a huge augmentation. You got to spill the beans.
Yeah. So I guess we're like two Detroit guys who are like, I think we lean into being boring, but let's give you some exciting answers.
Come on, no more bears. I want both.
Yeah, exactly. By the way, all of our values, we boil them down into two words, which is radical pragmatism. And so
I was going to ask you about that. I have that in my notes. You see my notes right there?
Nice.
I was going to ask you about those words.
So the way that any company, we're getting to scale as a company. We're over 1,000 engineers. We do hundreds of millions in revenue. And so we're already let's just say becoming a stodgy company, for the lack of a better word, right? You're already starting to ossify. And so as this revolution hits us, the way that we've done it on the non-technical side, now remember, 82% of our company is software engineering. So it is a very technical company. Google is 50-50 to give you some context here. We've told all the commercial departments, legal, design, people operations, et cetera, that they have to the first request, gentle request, as again, Peter and I are gentle leaders. Our first gentle request was, use AI in your workflows. And what happened is, especially experienced folks, they're like, actually, this thing that we do works pretty damn well. And we've already, made it as efficient as possible. And so our kind of second wave and third wave is doing things like we have, a weekly live all hands. And so having departments go up and actually showcase, hey, this is how we're using AI in our function, in the legal function, within the constraints of what a legal team has to do, or within, design function, et cetera, that creates an environment where everybody thinks every problem I interact with, my knee-jerk reaction should be, is there a new tool that solves this rather than an old tool?
And you do that every week at your all hands. You have one of the teams get up and share how we use AI. Yeah.
Exactly. And so all it is keeping top of mind. And at some point, that lift just started happening where the knee-jerk reaction, and then the thing that's the most, I would say, exciting, or things that we typically don't talk about, but is most actual practical implementation is, well, a long time ago, we started an in-house software team that I personally lead, which is, the shorthand is the software that runs the company. And the software that runs the company obviously shouldn't be just a web app with org charts. And so making that more and more intelligent, it really is becoming the brain. So we dump, our own, it's becoming like the knowledge center. Like literally last night, the person who runs that product, sent me a voice message and say, hey, I think we're ready to like roll out essentially like a brain version of this based on these inputs. So I think it's still early days. I think if you saw it, it's interesting. I think we keep compounding, keep working on that software. Our enterprise will literally be a more advanced enterprise. And we can do that because we just use AI a lot in the company. We develop it, we make it, so then we point some of it towards enterprise.
Talk about gentle, because I want to come back to this. You've, or push on it, pull on it, I don't know. How do you wrestle with the question of gentle? Because that's a word you emphasized. And, you got CEOs like Toby Lutke, saying, hey, you cannot hire unless you can demonstrate that AI can't do the job, right? You've got Fiverr CEO, you've got Duolingo CEO making very kind of bold pronouncements. How do you think about leading they call it organizational transformation? Like if you look 5 years in the future, you can't imagine everyone not being AI augmented.
Yeah.
You think it just happens naturally, or how do you gently?
Yeah, I said that gentle word sarcastically.
Oh,
Anybody,
good. Okay.
Yeah. Anybody who works with Applied or at Applied would ever, I think the most common word they talk about is intense.
Okay. So but I think it's actually good because people like listeners don't have that context. You're saying you're so clearly not gentle that to say the word gentle is actually a joke. So when you say you gently recommend, I'm just looking back at my notes, right? You gently recommend that all functional leaders use AI in their workflows. Here's where I want to get very specific. What's the consequence of not doing so?
I mean, so the Duolingo, et cetera, the examples that you use, I've caught little bits. Another kind of controversial thing is me and Peter are not on social media. We tend not to like just spit the hair with thing has to really hit a level of certain frequency for, our ears to hear it. My assessment, I worked at YC for many years and I was very deep in the startup ecosystem. Half of that stuff is entertainment. So let's just leave the entertainment and bombasticness to the side. The practical reality of leading an organization is if somebody's a great head of design or somebody's a phenomenal general counsel, you're not going to fire them because they didn't try some startup that says they can read contracts faster. So I want to have that like direct conversation of what are the actual limitations of these products that are out in the market. Now, the leader should be able to articulate that. If they like shrug and say, don't know, boss, then we have bigger problems. So I think it's not these like, simple, like use this or get fired. Also, our company, I mean, it's no disrespect to like a Duolingo. Our company is order of magnitude, probably more complex, if not multiple order of magnitude. We work on AI safety systems that get deployed to machines that humans use. It is the most complex. We are as technical as a technical company can be. Like we are at that level of an Anthropic or an OpenAI in terms of raw technical.
Double-digit percentage of our company have technical PhDs. Majority of the company has graduate degrees. So like the caliber is very high. And then because of that, in each of these fields, there's just a lot of adoption. Like, an example is like in IT, you can automate 80% of the IT tickets that come in for basic stuff. In project management, you can actually get a better organizational structure of deliverables using that. Compensation analysis, right? We can use that to figure out if there are outliers in the leveling compensation scheme. So there's all of these things that sort of just fall into place since we have the right leaders in place in different.
Yeah. As other leaders who are listening to this, I think the question isn't, you can use AI adoption as a proxy for how good your leads are, but it should not be the sole like decision maker, right? Because then you're also going to get, your organization gets to any level of size, 50 people, 100 people, the human nature. They're going to start filtering and saying things to you in certain ways. And so if you do something simplistic of use AI or get fired, guess what? You're going to have a crappy lawyer who's going to say the right things to you. And suddenly they're the GC because they're quote unquote adopting AI, and the actual lawyer who's really good at their job, who hasn't, will gets fired. And then you put your company actually at bigger risk.
Can I ask go back on the human side? Obviously a lot of the stuff that everybody's building, including you, is stuff that at the end of it is in service of a human, right? Like we built autonomous drive so that they can drive us around. And then we build something that probably works, and then lawmakers change the law. And so like the software update comes in and suddenly it doesn't drive automatically because, like there was a bug somewhere that killed the person, which is understandable. But it would suggest to me that a lot of the stuff that you do is actually solving the technical problem, but I would imagine that you guys have as much kind of challenges understanding the human problem. Why is it that the person sitting in the big dumper doesn't do X and all those things? How do you actually, like, from an organization point of view, start to internalize that into an organization that is so technical? Like, how does the human understanding and the technical understanding overlap?
I mean, what's also different about our company being an enterprise company is for all of these technologies, we're partnering with the manufacturer who makes these machines and knows these markets well. We don't know anything about mining. We don't know anything about commercial trucking. But when you work with the literally top commercial trucking companies on the planet, as an example, commercial trucking, the real problem, as much as in the cabin, is actually they're small businesses. A lot of commercial trucks are owned by a LLC that owns maybe 1 to 3 trucks. And so the software and AI problem, as much as in cabin and it's the fleet management stuff and it's the maintenance. And for a lot of people, that's their biggest, most expensive asset. As a family, that truck or those 2 trucks,
they get a mortgage for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And so,
Sure.
So our partners are the ones who say, point your AI technology towards this set of problems. And then we put those set of problems. And it's all under the vehicle intelligence umbrella. But that's how we have been able to work in lots and lots of different fields. It's not because we know all these fields really well. We actually are just fundamentally an AI company, but instead of our AI focus being LLMs, it's within vehicles. And then we partner with manufacturers. And this worked out quite well.
Can I ask a innovation kind of level question? Henrik and I both have kind of a shared passion and curiosity and morbid interest, you could say, in the challenges of organizations in innovating. I'd be curious here. You mentioned earlier that you studied at the GM Institute. Why isn't applied intuition coming out of GM? Can you just talk for a second about the challenges of innovation and your observations?
Yeah, that's interesting when you say that. So, I mean, in some ways it did. I'm an alumni of General Motors as well, not only the GMI, but also the company. So in some ways it is the case. Even earlier, we're talking about all these self-driving companies that ultimately didn't make it. Where they do make it is a lot of those alums who learned all that stuff are in other companies, and they're pushing Tesla and Waymo and Applied Intuition to production. So I think it's incorrect to say like that suddenly that if somebody works at General Motors and General Motors doesn't create an AI, that somehow General Motors didn't contribute to it. It did, but not in a direct way. That's kind of
right.
how
But
complex
it's not affecting, say, their market cap.
Exactly.
Right?
So that question is actually a separate question, which is you could actually have the talent inside the company, but why can't the company almost extract that talent? And that's actually not a General Motors or a manufacturer problem. That is a large organization problem. Because a better example than General Motors is Google. Google invented this technology. OpenAI is a little group of people who've actually monetized it. Why did that happen? Because that's actually a way more complex thing, because it's literally Google's job to make that technology and make it great, and they didn't. And so I think it's really, there's something about the reason Silicon Valley is successful is because there's something about small teams that are incentivized through equity that just do really well. And it's been 75 years of proving that case again and again. But when I was at YC, the question always happened, will there ever be an era where there won't be startups? No. I actually think that there's more likely to be an era that there won't be really large tech companies before than there will be an era that will be just because the incentive structure. And the reality of is, if when you work as a group of 5 people, why do 5 people they don't need to do sync meetings, and they don't need to do Monday morning, what happened last week? Because you're just literally, when we were in a living room with 5 of us, our all hands would be, we would twirl the chairs and would say, okay, let's talk about what's going on. And often those all hands, we're so in line with each other, there isn't much to talk about.
Yeah.
And so then we'd be like, is there anything we haven't discussed? So now the question is, why doesn't it happen in a large company? It's because it's the structure of communication. Once you start adding layers of managers and you have to have a central control command. So the hypothesis would be, if you had tons of small groups that were loosely affiliated, that could be in a corporate,
a better
kind of
enterprise design.
yeah, enterprise style. Now, there's companies have tried this. I think Steam had this one version of like a managerless office and pods and stuff. We tried actually without an org chart when the company was, sub 75 people. Extremely difficult. There's a reason these org charts. It's kind of like you look at human societies around the globe. The concept of a nuclear family with parents educating their children, school systems, and hospitals. A huge amount of cultures, and they all look shockingly similar. Right? They all have a job. Rarely societies today, you don't have some version of an occupation that you specialize in. You don't just stay at home. So why does it happen? It's somehow the environment that gets created that. So I think the $1 trillion question is, how can you make large organizations operate like small organizations? And that's like, how do you make a tall person operate like a small person? Or how do you make it's almost paradoxical because the incentives are not correct and the communication structures are not ideal for that reality.
As a fellow kind of student of this topic, if you're curious, one book I'd recommend is Safi Bakal's Loon Shots. I don't know if you've read that, but he kind of talks about this.
I
And he
thought
actually,
you were about to pitch my old book, Jeremy, The Acorn Method, which makes this exact
I wasn't,
point.
But the podcast would not
Thanks
be
for
complete
nothing.
without us sharing at least one book that we've written.
Safi's
But
book is
Safi
better.
Bakal's book,
He's incredible.
Loon Shots, is quite interesting. And one thing that he gets to, Qasar, which is just to your point, is I think it's Dunbar's equation.
Yeah,
but it's this
150.
idea of about 150 people is kind of the max before things start to break down. Anyway, you were reminding me of that as you were talking.
Yeah, one way, by the way, Google, we're both ex-Googlers, and a huge part of the company is from Google. At some point, like when the company was a few hundred people, literally still, I think up to 400 people, the company's still majority Googlers. So we have a lot of Google people in the company. And so, we know the company quite well. If Google had really, in the era of 2010, as the company was now at scale, making like $1 billion in cash flow a month, what the company did at that time was he started the moonshots, ultimately were Waymo and that organization, X, right? Yeah, that came out of there. And then Alphabet kind of emerged another 5 years later. If you could go back in time, and let's say Google instead of did something different, they believed, hey, large organizations are not ever going to be effective, and we're basically going to be like a holding company venture capital fund. If you look at YouTube is a great case study. It was left alone and it grew into this thing. If YouTube had become Google Video, YouTube would not be what YouTube is today. And I think everybody, you don't have to have a PhD in tech strategy in Silicon Valley to get that. And so if Google could have replicated that across hundreds of companies, there's a version that Google is actually just almost like a guild of companies. And so one of the reasons that large organizations are more efficient is they're sharing learnings. You share recruiting learnings across, we have 30 some products. All the products when one product learns something about marketing, all the products benefit from that. So if you have this guild of an organization where you share this information, you have incentive to share, maybe that could work, but that's not our business. Our business is vehicle intelligence. So
I think that might be, I know everybody has a hot stop, so I will be the downer that kind of like throws that in there.
Henrik, there's a funny way of saying bored. But yeah, let's...
I mean, I just couldn't keep my eyes open anymore, so it was that or...
We often in these conversations are like the most interesting point when everybody's like, finally, we're like, oh, join us again for another interesting. It's Seinfeld, right? You got to leave on a high note.
That's awesome.
You guys are amazing. Thank you.
Mr. Audley, is Nerd to talk about something that wasn't kind of like another thing that comes out in a text prompt, right? This is something that it's different.
I mean, I thought it was hysterical. The number of times we talk about human tank interaction is just it's hysterical. One thing I find myself kind of wondering about, as Qasar painted the bear case, so to speak, is just really, I think the question of where will the average shake out? It's hard for me, and maybe I'm optimistic or Pollyanna about this, because becoming a good collaborator to AI is so accessible. It requires no advanced degree. It requires minimal advanced training. It just requires some intention and maybe a little bit of practice, but everyone can be a top 1% collaborate or get top 1% outputs out of AI if they give it a little bit of attention. And so the bear case, is saying that it's effectively for most people just going to remain information retrieval. That makes me sad to think about, because it just means the vast majority of people will hardly scratch the surface of possibility, hardly scratch the surface of capability. That's something I'm thinking about. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that from where you sit.
No, I mean, I do think that he just pushed this as the bear case, right? My head kind of went a lot was, I think when we talk about specifically generative AI, a lot of us are just very anchored in it can generate image and text and code. And I think as I was kind of reading up for this conversation, I was trying to understand a little bit more, like, how is AI being used in all the places that we don't normally talk about? And I stumbled into this case, which I'm not sure is like how real it was, but basically one of the issues of creating fusion energy, like unlimited energy, is to keep like the plasma stable. And people are now using AI to really help, I don't know how that actually works, but keep the plasma stable so that when they have these like two particles kind of colliding, they can have like almost like, it's not a force field, but like the force field stable. And so one of the kind of like unsung benefits of AI is that it now kind of like work as a participating actor in some of these things that could obviously revolutionize the whole world, because if we have unlimited pollution-free energy, that would be wild. And so what I think this conversation really kind of made me think of is like, there's probably this whole universe outside the stuff that we normally talk about, like having kind of like autonomous cars being like just that first step removed. But as we keep that step, like removing ourselves from the core of just generating text, code, and image and sound, then my head just normally don't go there. And so it was nice to kind of like explore that.
Yeah, I think it was wild to me. I mean, it just shows kind of what maybe sheltered lives we live. I mean, I work with Komatsu as an example, so I'm familiar with them as a business, certainly. And yet the thought that there are machines running 24/7 in cities in the middle of nowhere that for decades, and people who are spending months of their lives at a time there, it's such a different, and where visibility is limited because of dust, where humans are at risk because tires alone are 12 feet in diameter. That is such a different world from our day to day that it's in some way, it's really exciting and invigorating to realize there are people like Qasar and Peter who have dedicated themselves to improving the safety and, you could say, the humaneness of those conditions. I mean, it's really cool. It's like, it was in a conversation that made me feel more optimistic, actually, about the impact of technology.
The other thing that I was thinking about is, I mean, like, I like to hate on San Francisco because I don't live there. But
I know.
It is,
I know you do.
It is incredible.
You always hate on it publicly, but folks, privately, Henrik's always texting me going, "You're so lucky that you live so close to these."
But it is incredible, right? Like, you have people like these two folks that, clearly very smart and then very ambitious, right? They, I had, in full transparency, never heard about their company before. And one of my friends joined, and then we heard about them. And it's like I think, $15 billion company. They do incredible work. They have very big ambitions. They're doing something that's very complicated. And, you have to just admire kind of like the ambition level and the ability to think kind of just really big of a large group of people, specifically kind of like on the West Coast of the US. And so, yeah, like I was, there's another one where like, I want to hate on it, but it's actually pretty impressive.
Speaking of large, the comments, as you know, and probably is the case for you, the end of the conversation is always my favorite part. We were talking about what does it look like to enable innovation in an organization. Qasar's comments on the size of the organization mattering. The fact that, I mean, they're a startup, right? I mean, they've raised whatever, $500 million. So they're not nothing, but they've got 1,000 people. And he said, quote, "We are already stodgy." I think anybody who's got a 10,000 person or 100,000 person organization goes, "Wow, what I wouldn't give to only have 1,000." And yet he's noticing how many of their functions are starting to be, what did he say, sclerotic, right? And just calcified. And to me, it's a really interesting, I mean, they are still able to do something like, which I think is a great technique at the weekly all hands, do a showcase of how folks are working with AI to keep it top of mind. But it is an interesting challenge. What is the ideal organizational configuration to continue to invent the future and to future proof yourself? I liked his kind of alternative realities, kind of Black Mirror version of Google, which is a guild of small teams. How many more YouTubes might there be? I don't know. What would the cost to Google search be? I don't know, but it's an interesting kind of alternate reality to kind of entertain. And I think that's actually the
100%.
perfect note to end on. Could we have the secret code word be alternate reality or Black Mirror? I think is a perfect code word to end on.
It's actually 2 words. Just pointing it out.
Code words to end on. It's 2 sets of 2 words. It's deeply confusing. If you're confused and you only want one code word, just say confused.
But whatever you do, please like and subscribe and share it with the friends and put it on LinkedIn and email us if you have any good ideas or questions, because that is
Tell us who we should interview next.
Yes. And with that, bye.